Well, tēnā koutou katoa. No America ho no te tematanga, ko te taita toku manga, ko waitaki toku awa, ko otatahi toku kainga inai nei, e roia toku tunga mahi o Perryfield Lawyers, ko Stephen mo toku ingoa, no reira ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. Hey, it's a real pleasure to welcome everybody to this webinar. We're going to be looking at the changes to the Charities Act. And we hope that this will be a helpful session for you all, that it will be something that you go away feeling empowered and hopefully able to have conversations with people in your organizations. And I know some of you are then advisors to charities or you're helping them on their journeys. So hopefully it gives you things that you can take with you as well. We are recording it, so for some of you, you might be watching this having clicked a link, so welcome to you all as well. My name's Stephen Moe, and I'm really lucky I'm joined by Annemarie today. So Annemarie, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Hi, everybody. My name is Annemarie, and I'm fortunate to be one of the people in Stephen's team assisting with a lot of the charitable work that we do, or work for charities, I should say. So lovely to see you all here today.
Yeah, it's really good. We love this sector, don't we? Like to be able to help people who then help so many people, it just feels like a privilege. So it's one of the part of the driving forces within our team. We call ourselves an impact team because by helping people, there's then many organizations that are out in society helping others. So the focus for today, the format is we're going to be telling you, we're going to focus on three major changes which have come about because of the Charities Act amendment. And as we talk through those, we welcome your questions and your comments because we want to know what you're thinking. What does this mean? I don't understand this. So we can do that using the chat function. I know you all know how to use it. In fact, why don't we use it right now? Let us know where you are in the country and what is the weather like where you are. So let's prove that we know how to use the chat. And also, it'd kind of be fun to see who's joining the call. So if you've got a question as we're going through, we are going to welcome those questions. And oh, look, see, now we know it's raining in Auckland.
Right.
I hate to tell you, everyone, but it's beautiful and sunny here in Otautahi, Christchurch. So beautiful, cold, but beautiful. So thank you, everybody. This is great. I love seeing all the different locations on a call like this. Really cool. So we're going to do, that's the format. We're going to tell you about these changes. We're going to look at the questions that come through in the comments. We're going to answer the questions. And then we're going to open it up if there's any last things. We might tell you about some other resources as well. Some of you are incorporated societies. There's actually a lot of change for those types of entities. There's 24,000 of them, and they all need to re-register. So if that's you, we actually have a guide for incorporated societies, which we'll send out in the link. We'll send a follow-up email with a link to the guide. So Charities Act, Annemarie, the Charities Act, we're talking, so people get confused to start with. There's different acts which apply for different entities. And I think it's important to clarify which one we're talking about. In the same way that there's different government departments that do slightly different things, there's different acts which apply to different entities. But this act, which we're focusing in on, is the Charities Act 2005, which is the one that is the overarching umbrella over the registered charities. So this is an important distinction to get clear, is that you can have a charity, but it might not be a registered charity. Do you want to tell them what registration actually means?
So registration can be a really great option for people because it allows that organisation to issue invoices to donors, and those donors can then claim 30% of that donation back through IRD. So that can be a great incentive for people to give you a donation. And it's really great to be able to do that. And if you're clever, you can always encourage the donors to redonate the amount of their refund back to your organization as well.
Yeah, so that's really the act that we're focusing in on. So this is all about how do you go from being a charity, which might not be registered, to being a registered charity with charity services. Charity services are the government department which looks after charities in this way. And there's actually some people on the call here from Charity Services, so welcome to you. And they're the ones who are looking after the charities. I can recommend their website. They've got a lot of really good resources and information. For example, if you're starting out, what is a charitable purpose? It's actually really some good guidance there. So that's the act that we're talking about. It's the Charities Act 2005. And the reason that we're here today is that 2005, I don't know if you reflect on this, but that's 19 years ago.
It terrifies me to think about that.
Yeah.
But
Time goes by. So I remember in 2005, like what were you doing in 2005? For some of us, it doesn't feel like it was 19 years ago. For me, that was the year I got married. I was living in Wellington. And so it was kind of a special year. But 19 years has gone by. So the act, the Charities Act, really needed to have a bit of a refresh. Now, when Labor first came in sort of mid 2010s, it was on the agenda that this refresh needed to be happen. And then we had COVID, and COVID kind of threw plans into disarray for, well, basically everybody, didn't it?
Yeah.
And one of the things that seemed to be affected was the timing of this review and the changes. So it's now come out. It was last year in 2023 that the changes were finally made. And I think it's important to frame the conversation, to frame the changes in that this was never intended to be a wholesale review, or some people would call it a first principles review of the Charities Act. It was more like a, where can we have some changes or modify things? I would go so far as to say, what can we tweak to make it better? So that's been the subject of a lot of people's discussion and wondering, should it have been a first principles review? But just to be clear, that's not what happened. So that's why it may not even have been on your radar that this was happening. So it's a chance for you to upskill on what changed. But a first principles review would probably go back right to the beginning and say, well, what is charitable? There's 4 heads of charity: advancing education, reduction of poverty, advancing religion, and purposes beneficial to the community. This review did not go into what should the purposes be. I'm actually kind of grateful for that. People might be surprised at this. I actually think that it's working pretty well, and I would hate to see a review come in and some things might get lost in that review. Some purposes might be decided they don't qualify anymore. So I'm not actually in favor of first principles review. But what this was amending. So the implementation was staged. So it didn't all happen at once, but there was a number of changes. So 5th of July, there was some changes made. 5th of October, there was some additional changes. And then in July of 2024, there will be kind of the final changes. So I also want you to know that I am going to send out a presentation. I got it right here, actually. But we don't want to distract from the words that we're using by having it on screen. So we're going to go through these changes, but we will follow up with the written presentation. So don't worry, that's coming as well. Annemarie, do you mind mentioning maybe well, there's 3 changes that we're going to be talking about. Do you want to tell them, how about the officer definitions? I think that one gets people interested.
Sure.
And then I'll take the next ones. So officer definitions is actually quite a big change. I said that they were tweaks, but actually this is quite an important one to be aware of. Do you want to let them
Yeah.
know what we're talking
So
about?
I think it's useful when you think about any legal change to consider why the law has changed, because that can actually give you a different frame to consider things through. And what we've noticed with changes to the Charities Act and also to the Incorporated Societies Act is that government is increasingly expecting higher levels of governance from the people who are in those governance or strategic roles. And that's because they want people out in the community to have confidence in the charitable sector, and to make sure that those people are doing a really great job, considering that there are so many charitable entities out there and the work that they do is incredibly important for our society. So that's what's going on in the background. So what we're seeing is a trend towards a tightening up of some of those requirements. And the officer's role is a really great example of that. And if you are in an incorporated society, you will see that there are changes that have happened in that act as well. So really, a key change is, and it's under Section 4, so officers, and this is quite important, now include anyone who has a significant influence over the entity's substantial decisions. And so really what that boils down to is you might have people who are formally appointed into governance positions, but other people might be sitting in the sidelines and making significant influences on decisions. They may also be captured by that definition of an officer. So, and that's very similar to what you would see in terms of the definition of a director in companies law. So you can see the parallel happening there. So it could mean that an officer can be a trustee, a member of a board or governing board, and it can also be people in other positions, for example, chief executives or treasurers, or even people who don't have a particular title. Um,
And that's actually, I see in the chat, somebody's put a question, could the CEO be an officer? So
yes, indeed. Yeah.
you've answered it without even seeing the question, but it's a great question. So we get this a lot, like, what is it actually going to mean?
Yeah. And so, I mean, when it comes to directors' law, it's all about saying, well, if you're having a significant influence, and for example, something negative happened, then we don't just want to penalise the people who are formally appointed. We want to be able to capture all of the people who have had a significant influence. And so that's the same type of approach that is being looked at here. And so if we were to try and put it into a nutshell for charities, just really think carefully about who is in your orbit that is actually having any form of significant influence. They too should consider their influence and understand that they may be captured by that amended definition. Yeah, and just really have that on your radar. But the key words are the ones to really pay attention to are substantial influence. So if somebody just says, hey, why don't you do X?
Yeah.
It's unlikely to be deemed significant influence.
Yeah. So hopefully this is the change number one that we want to alert you to. The other changes which we're coming to is when you review your rules and accumulated funds, just to give you where we're headed. But this change number one, we lead off with it because this is the one we get most questions about, like, okay, what does this mean? So I think what I might do is actually just read a little bit from the act rather than this is me talking or you talking. What does the act actually say in term, because it is quite clear. And section 4 is the interpretation section. So that's the definition. What is the definition of an officer? So it says, in relation to a charitable entity, means a person occupying a position in the entity who is able to exercise significant influence over substantial decisions of the entity, including, but not limited to, in relation to a trust, the trustees of the trust, in relation to any other entity, a member of the board or governing body of the entity. So those are fine. Like, I think we all agree that those were already captured, right? But the third one is a person occupying any other position, for example, a chief executive or treasurer. So it's even explicitly stated there, if that position enables them to exercise a significant influence. So that's really the framing of it. And it includes powers that have been granted to them. So yeah, this is the first one that we want you to be aware of. Keep the questions coming in the chat. We're going to come back to them. But from my perspective, this actually raises some questions that I think each of you should be taking to your next board meeting. And that is asking who is covered now by this definition. In the past, trustees, yes, but actually, whatever title you give them, the general manager, the CEO, fill in the blank of how you talk about people in your organization, it's probable that they were also going to be captured, by what this definition says. So yeah, any other
Stephen, so there
thoughts on
was a
that one?
really great question that came through. I think there may have been a couple, which was around, well, if the keywords are significant influence, what does that look like? And in law, things are rarely black and white. So we did some research recently about exactly that in relation to an incorporated society. And there haven't, to our knowledge, been any specific cases around that. But things that you might expect to see would be influencing a really major decision, particularly if it had financial consequences, and particularly if it probably had ended up with some negative consequences. So it does need to be significant because of that word substantial. And influence doesn't have to be, I'm telling you to do this. It can be more subtle than that. It could be because of the nature of the relationship, a power imbalance or something like that. So you do need to give that some thought. But it wouldn't be, it's a reasonably high threshold is what we would suggest.
Yeah. And I think it is something that will be evolving, and we'll definitely be updating you as we see cases or see more commentary on what it means. So yeah, we'll move on, I think. One other thing I wanted to say, when I send out the follow-up email, I'm going to put a link to another follow-up session to this, because I know what's going to happen is that there's going to be lots of questions. So I'm going to start doing more just ask me anything type, let's gather. And so I've booked one for June or maybe July. I'll put it in the link when I send you its follow-up with this video and the materials. So feel free to join in on that when you go. Already some people have signed up for it, so that's really great. So officer is definitely something that you need to be thinking about. The next one that I think we should talk about is the accumulated funds, because this one's actually really interesting. And I don't, there might be more subtlety to it than I know of, or reasons why it's a change. Yeah, we're not going to go into conspiracy theories or anything, because I think it's simply that there's now going to be a requirement that if you have accumulated funds, so that's money in a bank account or deposited somewhere, that you will need to report on how you are using those funds. This is only for the top charities. We're not talking about the tier 4, which is the smallest charities. So it's those charities which have more than 140,000 in annual expenditure. But going forward, they'll need to provide reasons for holding funds. The interesting thing here is it's not actually a change in the act itself. It's a change in the annual reporting form, which will come into charity services. So I printed it out. This is still the sample, because when they were consulting, and it's probably not going to come through on the screen very well, but you can see that there's already a category there, which is talking about what are your accumulated surplus or deficits, reserves, total accumulated funds. And then the question will be something like this. I'm not sure if it's totally finalized yet, but it says, how do you plan to use your charity's accumulated funds in the future? And then it gives you two little bullet points. Things to consider: how accumulating funds will help to achieve your charity's goals of advancing your charitable purpose. And secondly, specific reasons for accumulating funds, i.e. planning for future generations, the sustainability of your charity, upcoming significant projects, or planned capital expenditure, e.g. buildings. So it's interesting, that change to me. It is something that, again, has maybe raised a few eyebrows, like, what's going on here? But I think, well, you go.
Well, Stephen, I just think if we look under the hood, why has that requirement been brought in? And again, without looking at conspiracy theories, why do you think it's been brought in, Stephen? What's kind of prompted people to say, well, why are you holding on to this money? I mean, whose business is it?
Well, do you want my honest answer?
Yes.
Well, I just wrote a report on impact investing, and I might put that in the chat when I get a chance. And one thing that I do see happen is that some charities end up sitting on vast reserves and large quantities of funds. Now, one of the reasons that they give in here is that you're safeguarding for the future. You know, you're looking for the next generation. You don't want to use up all your money today. But I think there is also an issue with charities who simply sit on their money, put it into term deposits, and don't use what they have to actually advance their purpose. So I think underlying this sort of a change is actually a desire to see charities think more proactively about what they have and how they're using it. I don't buy into the conspiracy theory of it's trying to identify amounts that aren't being used so that somehow there can be a you must use it type of direction from government to charities. But I think it's more intended, what money have you got? What assets do you have? How are you using them to advance the purpose? But as you know, I tend to be a glass half full character. So that's my interpretation or my looking at why it is. And the reality is, for many of you on the call, like if you think about your charities, why were you set up? Usually there was a founder, someone endowed some money, and it was to advance a purpose. So if the purpose of that charity has morphed over time to be more about we've got to preserve what we have and only use a tiny portion of the interest which we get from the safe term deposits where we invest because we're scared we might lose it, then I think this is kind of a nice wake-up call, because it's saying, actually, what is the purpose of having your accumulated funds? Because for better or worse, every time I open the newspaper or look out the window even, there is vast need in our society. Social housing, mental health, climate change. Like, we've got a lot of things that we need to be using our funds to be able to do. So yeah.
And it's probably useful to apply a donor or a stakeholder lens to that decision as well. I mean, are people donating money to you, donating it to you so that it can sit there accumulating interest? Probably not. And I appreciate that things can be far more complicated than that. But you know, if there's an opportunity to release some funds to do something, great, maybe there's an opportunity there. But of course, in many cases, charities might be accumulating funds for a capital project or something like that, and that's completely understandable. And no one is going to question that. So
yeah. And I think that's the take heart from this. Like, I don't think no one's going to come knocking on your door saying we're not happy with what you put, but you will need to think about it and be a bit more proactive than in the past. Like, yeah, we have a building project and we need to save the money so that we can build this new education facility or whatever it is for you. So maybe just a bit more different lens, thinking about what you've got and why you use it. in the chat, I've put a link to this impact investing paper. I actually hope it's a challenge to people who read it. So please have a read. Feel free to share it with trustees of trusts that you know that maybe have an older mindset of we got to preserve it for the rainy day. So yeah, but that's change number 2. We're going to keep things moving because we want to get to your questions in the chat as well. We've talked about accumulated funds. We've talked about the change in the definition of officers. And the third one is the requirement to review your rules. Do you want to outline?
Oh, what does that mean?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. It's not scary. So that's a really good thing to keep in your mind. Again, if we look at why are we being asked to do this? Well, a lot of charities have a trust deed and it might sit in a drawer. It may have cobwebs all over it. And of course, this is only some charities. But if you've got a set of rules, it's really important that you know what they say and that you abide by them. Otherwise, what is the point of having the rules? So this is all about encouraging charities to practice good governance. So just do the right thing. And when you think about it, it's very common sense. And of course, you should be familiar with what is in your rules. And by having a look at them every 3 years, by kind of forcing you to have a look at them, it's making you think, well, does something need to be updated? If you think about charitable trusts, for example, we had law changes in 2019 as well under the Trusts Act. So even if you had your charitable trust done in 2018, chances are it's ready for an update already. And so this just prompts you to get familiar with the document and to think, oh, what might need to change? What's not working? Are we following the rules? Are we doing what we're supposed to do? So, I mean, I think, Stephen, rather than thinking of this as housework,
Yeah.
and a bit of a grind and a pain, if you can reframe that and think, well, it's a good thing to do. In fact, it's kind of the right thing to do. And isn't it what you all should be doing as good governors? So yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And that's really the change, is that every 3 years you'll need to be saying that you've considered your rules and that you've confirmed that they're fit for purpose. Now, the other thing to add, the extra layer there, is that the law is always changing. Welcome to our world. There's always new acts. There's always going to be updates or changes. So just to make it really concrete, the Trusts Act 2019 it actually came into force confusingly in 2021, but it changed and reformed the law around trustees and their duties. So if you have a trust document, which is from before basically 2021, it probably doesn't refer to the latest legislation. And here's the really important part. It probably doesn't protect the trustees in the way that's actually allowed and possible under the Trust Act 2019, because it's probably referring to the old act. And the new act says you can modify the duties of trustees if they're modified in your trust deed. So actually, it's a self-interested thing, because for trustees, you should probably modernize and update your trust deed to protect yourself.
Yeah.
And
it makes really good sense.
when I frame it that way, people are like, oh, okay, maybe we will look at seeing if we need to update. But I'm making it specific for trusts. But equally, there might be changes that affect a company, because remember, there can be charitable companies. There might be changes that affect an incorporated society. In fact, all 24,000 need to re-register. So you need to be thinking about your rules. What do they say? And then I'm a big believer in good governance. So I've just been at the Institute of Directors. They've had a 2-day hui down here in Otatahi Christchurch, 750 people gathering to learn about governance. I would love to see governance become a real priority for the for-purpose sector as well, that we have excellent standards of governance. And the base that you build good governance on is documents that record what are our responsibilities Who are the trustees or the board? How do we make decisions? What is a quorum? What is succession? Do we have rotations of people coming in? Do we have 3-year terms? Can you just be appointed for life? Like, you get the point. There's a lot of things which the foundation documents for a charity should be covering. And here's the honest truth. We've acted, in the last year, we've helped set up about 50 different charities. So those are new ones. We can get them started with the right document, but a large number of other charities approach us right from tier 1 through to tier 4. You look at the trust deed and you know it was written on a typewriter, sometimes in 1937 or 1972 or whatever, and it's simply outdated. The wording, the terminology, the way things are expressed, potentially how you amend it as a document will be quite inadequate. We just had that today, didn't we? So the point is that these documents should be living and changing to adapt as the law itself changes. So that's just the key message here. And what we're doing is helping a whole lot of charities look at their rules and upgrade them so that you get the best protection as the officers who we talked about before. So yeah, just really important to be aware of that.
So it's kind of like enforced dusting or vacuuming.
Yeah.
You know, but that's okay because it keeps things nice and tidy, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And as you do that, here's a real good question. We're seeing this with all the incorporated societies who we're helping right now. When did you actually follow your rules? So it's very common, and I challenge you, all of you, get your rules out and have a look at them. Oh, what's this about 2 weeks written notice must be provided for a meeting to be held validly? We've never done 2 weeks notice. Okay. What's this provision here about quorum? Oh, we're meant to have this person at every, wait a minute, we've never done that. So that you get the point. Update your rules so that they reflect how you actually operate. Like, it's not that complicated, but it's something that there's a disconnect there.
Yeah. And what another useful point is that when things go wrong, you need your rules and you need to be able to show that you've followed your rules, because that fundamentally is your law. There's the law of your rules and there is the law of legislation and case law. So keep that in mind, because you are meant to do what you say that you do.
Yeah. And there's a funny comment right now. Sarah said, you don't have our members. They read our rules and they let us know if we're not following them. Well, I actually prefer that over the alternative, which is nobody's looked at the rules and they're so out of date that you're not following them at all. Like, at least you have that. I realize it's a burden, but equally, this might be your chance to refresh them to make sure that they're appropriate and adequate. So that's really the theme there. So that's the third key change that we really want you to be aware of. In the presentation that we send around, there's some other things which we're going to include. And we've also written 2 articles which summarize other changes. We're not proposing to go into all of the changes because we want to turn our attention to some of the questions in the chat, because I think that is a really good source of material as well. And also, one thing, keep putting your questions in. I love questions. We have an FAQ on our Incorporated Societies Information Hub, and we're up to 133 questions that we've received. And we then put it into a document which is just freely available. It's a great way to learn and go through and work out what other people have asked. So keep them coming. The reason I say that is I can guarantee you we're not going to be able to go through all of your questions, but I am willing to commit to us looking at them all and then trying to summarize them and come back to the wider group with some thoughts about what it is that was asked in the chat. So the point is, it's not going to be wasted if you put your question there. I commit to having a look at every single question and looking at, well, here's an easy answer, or look at this resource, or whatever it is. So yeah. There's some question. Well, there's some. Before we turn to the questions, I noticed there's quite a few people talking about or wondering about incorporated societies. So I'm just, this is true multitasking. Copy, paste. So that link that's going in the chat is our Incorporated Societies Information Hub. I think some of the people are asking questions here, and I think there will be a lot of answers on that page. We've done more than a dozen videos. We've done dozens of articles. We have a guide, and I think it's the most complete source of information for incorporated societies anywhere.
And it's free.
I'm happy to say that. So you're welcome to have a look at that. And yeah. All right, so let's turn to the questions. Keep them coming. Jess has here, can you repeat what you said about trust deeds that were written before 2019? So I'm not saying that they're invalid or anything major. I'm saying that they probably need a refresh because the new Trust Act 2019 introduced different requirements for trustees. So you can modify what the Trust Act says if you update your trust deed. There's some rules, some duties which you cannot change. Like you have to know the rules of your organization, of your trust, and you have to act in good faith. And there's some basic things that you can't change, but there's some duties which you can change if you alter them in the trust deed. So it's a chance to refresh sort of how you're operating.
I might just add there as well, Stephen,
Yeah.
that when you look at the Act, and we really encourage you to go and have a look at the Act, because they're not as grisly as you might, or as boring as you might think that they are. And once you get a little bit more familiar with it, it's less daunting each time you go and have a look at it. But the Acts say if you don't modify something in your incorporated society rules or your charitable trust rules, then it's what is in the Act that will apply. So, and often that's more stringent. So as Stephen said before, by modifying some of those rules, you're typically making life a little bit less onerous for trustees, for example.
Yeah, that's true. In the chat, I just put a link to that article I was mentioning. So if all this is fascinating and you want to know more, there's a link in there about changes to the roles of officers. The other ones, which we're not going to go in detail, is disqualifying officers, how that happens. The fact that Charities Services will be consulting on guidelines, the obligations of charities, extended timeframes for providing information. And then there's a part 2 to that article. If you click, you'll be able to see the follow-up as well. So we're just going to scroll back here. And yeah, we got Jeremy saying, does the Incorporated Societies Constitution Builder template meet the Charities Act requirements? Yeah, I would say yes. Yep,
Yeah.
I would say it does. I think anytime there's a free resource, it's probably going to not be as specific to your particular context as a bespoke one that's drafted just for you. Of course, it sounds a bit self-interested when I say that, because we can help you to customize for your context. But what I mean is that you might have a particular way that you make decisions, or you might have committees or dispute resolution procedures that probably are not going to be in the Constitution Builder. And sometimes what we do is get clients who build their new Constitution, and then they come and have us check it. And then we're able to add in a bit more subtlety and, specific things that we think that they might need.
I've used it. I've experimented with the Constitution Builder. And another observation we had is that sometimes it can add in too much information. And it might be beneficial to not include too much information, because you don't want to have to keep changing your rules, because it's not that easy to change them. So you want to kind of future-proof them as much as you can. So don't put in a whole bunch of stuff you don't need to have in there. You can put that somewhere else.
Yeah, we actually often will say, why don't you put that in a policy? Like, let's have something that is important, but not important enough to enshrine it within our trust deed itself. And that leads nicely to Camilla's question. Great to see you, Camilla, or not to see you, but to see that you're here. Keep doing the amazing work that you do. Yeah, so she said, do we need to provide an updated trust deed if we change our rules? If you're meaning by rules, if you're meaning the rules in the trust deed, then yes. What you actually need to do is have a variation deed, which updates your trust deed. This is really important. I had somebody come and they had filled in a new trust deed because they thought, well, lots of the rules have changed, so let's just have a new trust deed. Guess what they did when they signed that new trust deed? They created a new trust. So it's really important. What you're doing is varying your existing trust deed. You do that by having a deed of variation, which basically says the trustees met cause, 7.3 says that we can modify the terms of the trust deed if we meet this level of approval. We now have that approval, or we got the members to agree, or whatever the requirement is. Attached is the updated version. And once that's done, it does need to be uploaded both to Charities Services and to Companies Office. So there's a CT3 form with Companies Office that you fill in, and Charities Services is online, and you upload it, and they will have a look at it as well. So you can't just go from being a charity that's about education of preschoolers to we exist to support penguins. Like you can't just sort of completely reinvent who you are. And in fact, your trust deed might limit what
Yeah.
you're allowed to change as well. So, but yeah, if you're updating your rules, you're going to have to tell people. And guess what? The bank will probably want to see the updated rules as well.
And here's a tip. Have a look at what your trust deed says about how it can be amended. So in that way, you're already getting familiar with your trust deed again.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Now, one of the things, a theme in some of these comments, and nice to see you here, Sebastian, down from Otago University. One of the themes is this point about investing. So just to clarify, it might be totally appropriate for your charity to invest funds so that they're there safeguarded for the future. And I would hesitate if you thought what I'm meaning is take everything that you own and put it into a startup, which is aligned with your purpose. What I do think trustees need to be thinking about is a bigger conception of how they use their invested funds. So right now, often it's just, well, we get this profit from the fund and we're going to use that to have a grant or a donation. But actually, I'm suggesting take a portion of what you've invested and think about where you've invested it and if it's aligned with your purpose. So not meaning take everything that you've got and just go over and put it into a startup or something. But yeah, there's some good comments in the chat there. So thank you, Sebastian, on that. The differences between aligned impact investing and sort of investing. Why are societies, thank you, Matt, for your comment. Why are societies required to re-register under the new act, but trusts weren't when the 2019 Trusts Act came out? Well, that's a great question. My thinking is that the Incorporated Societies Act, remember what the date was of the old act? 1908. So it had not been refreshed for 115 years or so.
Too many for my little brain to work
A
out.
long time ago. None of you on this call were alive in 1908, I think.
Yeah.
You never know. There might be someone. So it's a long, long time ago, 1908. And so I think that act had so many changes that were needed that they decided we actually need to have a whole re-registration requirement for these entities. Whether that's the right decision is probably open to debate because I'm unfortunately aware that of the 24,000, a very large number still don't even know that they need to re-register. And I think all of us who are involved in this sector need to continue to do our best to let people know that there is change that will affect them. I know that Charities Services are doing a good job in their newsletters, Companies Office, they're doing their best. But even so, there's going to be groups out there that just it's just not,
Mm.
they're not even aware of it. So yeah.
And again, I think it's a little bit like that housework analogy again. It can seem like a pain and a lot of effort to go to upgrade your rules to keep them in line with the new Incorporated Societies Act. But if you can turn that around a bit and try and think of it as the opportunity to be providing better governance, yeah.
Yeah, that's the glass half full. See,
Yeah.
you've only been here 6 months and you're already adopting my. Let's look at the best part of what it is. And to be honest, a lot of this, hopefully, we want to have good governance. We want to comply. We want to
It's
make
better
good
for everybody.
decisions. Like, let's have it be clear. Yeah. So Denise has put in a great comment here, and I hope this will help clarify for people. What exactly is defined as rules? Is this the trust deed or the board charter or policies or all of these?
What a great question.
It is, yeah. I think generally when people use the term rules, they're referring to the founding document,
Yeah.
in terms of like a trust deed. But my encouragement would be actually use it as a chance to consider all of your policies, the other documents that you're mentioning, the board charter, are they fit for purpose? Like, that's good. I liked your picture actually, housekeeping,
Yeah.
like it's a good chance to sweep the floor and make sure it's all clean.
I mean, you do hear terms bandied around in terms of governance. You hear rules, you hear constitution, you hear trust deed, constitution again, if it's a company. So it's really, but it is about that thing that started your entity. It's that kind of like touchstone is
Yeah.
normally what the rules refer to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and just I'm gonna agree with you, Nan, who said, "Isn't it prudent to hold reserves?" It sounds like they don't want charities to be cautious.
Oh,
I do agree. I think it is prudent to hold reserves. Like, I don't
yeah.
think that's what it's getting at. Yeah. Okay. Uh, let's see here. There's a few comments which were left earlier related to things as we were talking. So um, it's we got to draw the link here. I'll just pick up on Andrew's one. Again, we're going to go through all of these questions and try to pull out answers for them. So don't worry if I haven't touched on your question, and keep them coming. It's great to see. We've got really good engagement still. So happy to keep the questions coming in. So Andrew said, what about professional advisors? So this is back to who is an officer. Could they be deemed to have significant influence if they give advice? My first impression is that they would not be at that level, because what they're doing is giving advice to the decision makers who then make the actual decision. But having said that, and I don't think this would apply to you, Andrew, or to us, but if an advisor came into a board meeting and the board was discussing and saying, should we, shouldn't we, and the board was wondering about what to do, and then they looked at the advisor and said, this is all really hard, help us make the decision. What should we do? You tell us. At that point, you're probably in that gray area, right? Where there would be significant influence over decisions. So
But
it's a good reminder for advisors, be clear on what
yeah.
you're doing as well.
And I think what you'll find is a lot of advisors would be, because of that, quite cagey about saying this is what you should do, because they will be looking to indemnify themselves if they can.
Yeah. Yeah. Picking up on this theme, Kirsty's got a great question. If we give delegated authority to someone where they have decision-making powers, would that be seen as significant influence, hence making them an officer? I think it's possible,
Yeah.
because if you're not making the decision, but they are, I guess it depends if they would then come back to the board and say, I investigated it, here's some options, and then ultimately you make the decision. But if you're being tasked with a significant decision, I think it would probably be arguable that you would be an officer.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
This is part of we'll see how courts interpret it.
Because it isn't black and white. And so it's really just, I think, prompting people to give that some thought. And I think it really is intended to catch malicious or actions, or actions which have had, a really bad impact,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
Because what the government is looking to do is avoid that happening as much as it can.
Yeah, true. Liam's asked a similar question. Can we assume that advisory committees would not be classified as an officer? Their role is to advise the CEO or board. They don't have the decision-making powers. And that's a really good way of phrasing it. I think that's what you've said it better than I did. That's the point, is that they're not actually making the decision. They're giving the advice. So hopefully that gives some comfort to my fellow lawyers on the call, and I see some accountants. A shout out to all of you and the good work that you're doing. Yeah, so I think that's some of the themes that are coming through. Well, we've got a lot of had a lot of good questions. We're going to look at the others as well, and make sure that we respond to any that we haven't answered in full here. I think what we'll do, we're running sort of towards the end, and I'll make sure we finish on time. So what I'd like to do is just mention a couple of quick things. The first one is that there's a case which has been talked about in more of the corporate world, but I want to draw it to your attention, and that's Mainzeal. So this is the one where an ex-prime minister was held liable for decisions which were made at a governance body level. So you might be thinking, oh, well, that doesn't apply to me. We're a charity. But actually, there's principles and there's lessons that we can learn from this. So I think the figure was about $6 million that she was held liable for, as well as 3 other directors. One of them was liable for $18 million, but he was the shareholder appointed one. And I just think there's principles that we can learn from that. So I wanted to have mentioned it. Don't just say, well, that's in the business pages, it doesn't apply to us. Actually, I wrote an article on the 3 things that we can learn from Mainzeal case. So I'll put that in the follow-up email so that you can click and you can read them. I'm not going to go into them now, but it's a really interesting one. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that we do have a number of other guides. So I probably didn't do enough of an explanation at the start, but our law firm is a bit unique. We have a focused impact team. As far as I know, we're the only law firm in New Zealand that has this really focused in on purpose-driven entities. And so we have a selection of guides over here. So some of these might be relevant for you. If you've appreciated the content on the call, then we'll put some links to these things. What have we got?
Startups.
So yeah, there's a guide for startups. There's a guide for churches, so religious organizations. This is the Incorporated Societies guide. This is for all charities in New Zealand. And we've got a capital raising guide as well. The other thing is that I use LinkedIn all the time. So if any of you also use LinkedIn, then I'm really happy to connect with you there. I try to post helpful content there. And we have a newsletter which goes out to about 920 people. And once a month or so, it's not spammy. It's just, here's some upcoming resources, or here's some information that might help you. If you'd like to join that list, then just hit reply on the email. And we're really happy to be able to add you to the list. And yeah, I think, well, actually, Mere's put a note here. It's a good reminder that charities have an overlap with business. So on that theme, I don't talk about our not-for-profit team. I talk about our for-purpose team. So you might be wondering, why doesn't he talk about not-for-profits? Is because I don't like the phrasing of not being how a sector is described. It's a negative word, not, and it's by relation to for-profit, as if profit was the ultimate aim or the thing that we should be, and we're not. So I'm using the terminology for purpose. So if you'd like to join this movement, you're welcome. At the IOD conference, I noticed one of the panel discussions was on co-chairs, and it was looking at for-purpose organization. So I was like, yes, they changed the name.
Makes sense. It really does. I'm
I think
sure a
it
lot of
does.
people would be in agreement with you.
Yeah, I think it does. And the other thing is that I've been doing a podcast called Seeds. So Seeds podcast now has 391 interviews with inspiring people. So if you enjoyed this content and sort of our approach and our style, I'm just multitasking to copy paste the link in here. And there you go. So that's Seeds. I also am the host of the IOD podcast called Board Matters. And Board Matters is all about governance. So there's short 15 to 20 minute conversations about governance. So we're really happy to engage with any of you who have ongoing questions. We've been recording the session. We'll send around the link. And it's been a pleasure to have you here today joining us. Be watching out. We do these quite often. There is going to be one, I think I said it for early July, answering your questions. So in the follow-up email, there will be a link to sign up for that. If you have a topic that you think we should cover, let me know. We might just do it. We're happy to engage. The other thing, the final thing, and no one believes me when I make this offer, Annemarie, but I'm in Christchurch right now. I live in Rolleston. It's a 25-minute commute. I'm very happy to have phone calls with any of you.
It's true.
At no cost. I usually do 3 or 4 phone calls a week as I'm driving into work or home, because would I rather listen to the radio or talk with some amazing person doing inspiring work in the world? So I don't charge people for that. Of course, if you then need help with something, then we can talk about, well, what would the cost be? But I'm very happy to have these sorts of conversations. So hopefully that's an offer that, yeah, might be of interest to you. Annemarie, is there anything else that you wanted to say, or?
Oh, really just look under the hood. So instead of getting annoyed by these changes, see it as an opportunity to enhance what you're already doing, which is great work, which is so critical to our society. And boy, where would we be without charitable entities? And as well as that, don't be afraid of the legislation, go make friends with it. And do your housework.
Yeah, great. I like it. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Have a good rest of your day and keep up the good work. I just wrote this book about what you do and how it matters. So I might put a link to that as well in our follow-up email, and you can have a look. It looks like a children's book, but actually it's for the adults who are reading it. So thanks for everything you do and have a good rest of your day. Bye, everybody.